Perfect. So we're going to do a bit of a double act, aren't we, David? So starting with myth busting. So over to you, David.
Yeah, just going to take you through some information about apprenticeships and the world of apprenticeships. So we'll just start with a few myths and see whether we can get those busted for you. So,
okay, so the first one: apprenticeships are only for those who don't do well academically.
So no, this is a complete myth unto it. Apprenticeships are for all kinds of people and from an academic level. So from supported apprenticeships going all the way up to intermediate and to advanced level apprenticeships as well, for even degrees as well in that sense. So yeah, it's not just for low level education for that one.
Perfect.
Sorry, 1 second.
Apprenticeships only lead to low level paying jobs.
Okay, so while apprenticeships are traditionally been associated with certain industries such as construction and manufacturing, they now cover a much broader spectrum of apprenticeships, and they're available in fields like IT, health and care, finance, the creative industries, and a range of other jobs. So yes, I think that they do cover across more than just that.
Apprenticeships are limited to certain industries like construction and manufacturing, are they not?
No, this simply isn't true, and we'll cover. Oh, sorry, come back onto it.
Ooh.
Okay, sorry. Can you just go back onto that one, Fiona?
Yep. Oh, that's the next one on, isn't it? Do you want to go back or should you?
Apprenticeships don't offer poor. So the one about construction and industry is no, they don't. They're not just for the construction industry. They do cover quite a lot of industries now. So that's false on that one.
Perfect. So apprenticeships don't offer proper qualifications, do they?
No, this is simply not true. They cover all kinds of qualifications. So again, it's important to remember that apprenticeships are a nationally recognised qualification, but we'll cover that off in a little bit more detail as we go through the presentation.
Busted.
Okay.
So apprenticeships are not as respected as a university degree.
If anything, we're starting to see a shift in the way that employment sees apprenticeships, particularly for the higher level entry points for it. So with regards to this, what employers are really looking for is that kind of work experience, that combination of qualifications to go alongside it. This actually makes people who have gone through the apprenticeship, particularly at this level, a much more competitive alternative for the normal applicants that are coming through from university.
Great, and just to add to that, David, obviously there's a new apprenticeship framework for medicine, but also you'll have seen in the news today that teachers, they're also looking at an apprenticeship route into that rather than just the degree and other options.
That's right.
So apprenticeships are only for manual or blue collar jobs?
No, again, moving away from that kind of genre or that kind of stereotypical blue collar jobs where it probably is more hands-on practical and labor intensive. It is just one of these, it's just a misconception. People are really looking for different kinds of industries. So even places like game development, you can find that for digital marketing, media, when you get, like you said, with the NHS and the new teaching apprenticeships that we're coming on board. So it's not just for those kind of blue collar jobs.
So apprenticeships are only for those who can't get into college or university?
No, not at all. Like before, it's a viable alternative, but more importantly, those who offer they have a different kind of learning style and prefer things to be more hands-on and practical. It's a great way to access a qualification at the same time and continue to learn and build and earn at the same time. So yeah, it's not just for people who are wanting to go into college or university.
Busted. So employers don't really value apprenticeships, do they?
No, actually, again, they really do value apprenticeships. By this time, I hope you're starting to understand that this just isn't true with regards to how people see them. The combination of work experience and the recognised qualification is actually very attractive prospects to employer. But they also show the employer that anyone who's completed apprenticeship has got real sticking power due to the length of time that they might have had to complete an apprenticeship over. So that ability to kind of think differently and to be able to adapt to that working environment and to be able to also obtain that education with it is actually, it's one of the things that is most valued within the employment sector.
Understood. Perfect. So, what are apprenticeships and how do they work, David?
Okay. So apprenticeships are a way to be able to gain a recognised qualification and earn money at the same time. So what you'll find is that an apprentice might need to complete their functional skills of maths and English if they haven't already got them, but they can do that alongside the apprenticeship. But better if they have got them, if they are going into them, particularly from a competitive kind of eligibility criteria way. So they can still access maths and English alongside it, and they still get the recognised qualification in the subject area, but it's everything that they can do in one place from a hands-on practical point of view, and it becomes more assessment based. Now, looking at it from a point of view of the actual how that works and how that breaks down, you do about 6 hours per week working towards the actual qualification, and the rest of the time is spent doing the job. Now, what it also means is that there might be a minimum amount of hours that an apprentice can actually work. So what they tend to say is it's about 30 hours per week that you could do on an apprenticeship, to a maximum of 40 hours. And then the time spent on that they have to spend that 6 hours off the job training to work towards the actual qualification. And that might mean that the apprenticeship takes a little bit longer to complete, but they do get a qualification at the end of it, and they will earn that money at the end of it as well. Also, from that point of view, if you have a look at what qualifications might actually look like, a level 2 apprenticeship is equivalent to 5 GCSEs, and again is work plus assessment based training. Then the level 3 apprenticeships, if you were able to access that, that's the equivalent of 2 A levels. And then again, depending on the entry level point for the individual, an apprenticeship for level 4 to 6 and 7 will be degree level apprenticeships. So foundation at level 4 and then all the way up to a master's degree if that was where they took them to a level 7 apprenticeship as well. So you can see that actually the qualifications do marry up and match up depending on the entry level point and the skills that are there.
So what are supported apprenticeships and how do they work? Okay.
So a supported apprenticeship, particularly for learners who might have special educational needs and other disabilities that may require them to access additional support. So they might actually adapt the apprenticeship in terms of that person or that individual's ability alongside their qualifications. It might mean that they don't actually have to complete the functional skills alongside it, but again, there's only a few people actually trialing supported apprenticeships, and again I can cover that off in a little bit more detail a little bit later. But it is a really great way to add some flexibility and some tailored kind of training to an individual who might have a little bit of difficulty accessing the normal standard kind of qualifications through it. But the goal is a supported apprenticeship is about creating sustainability within that employment sector.
Why would my child choose to do an apprenticeship over a college course?
So what we believe is that there is a real combination between getting a formal education plus the experience and then actually going on to get gainful employment. So there are also lots of abilities for you to earn and learn. The advantage is that we won't just find our way through post-16 options, as well as their ability to build essential skills and independence and resilience. Those doing apprenticeships learn to communicate and basically work in the working world in different ways and understanding the hierarchies of different work placements. And that's what's so valuable about that experience when it comes to apprenticeships.
Are there any downsides or challenges to doing an apprenticeship?
There are a few challenges, you could say, but I wouldn't say they are classed as downsides. Apprenticeships can be a little bit more competitive. Now, the reason for this is that you're essentially applying for a job. So you will have to go through the normal interview process that might be associated with just getting into employment. And depending on the level, it could take you a longer time to actually complete the apprenticeship. And sometimes there are things like age restrictions that you might have to take into account. So you might need to have a driving license, or you might need to be over 18 to be able to actually access some of the different apprenticeships that are out there. The other things is that you can't be in any other form of education or employment at the same time or simultaneously. And apprenticeships do have eligibility criteria that look like you must have lived in the UK for more than 3 years, and there could be, depending on the level of apprenticeship that you're applying for, some qualification criteria and eligibility that may go alongside that as well.
Do you have to pay for an apprenticeship, and is there any funding available?
Okay, nope, there is nothing to pay for an apprenticeship. In fact, the learner actually earns the money while they're on the apprenticeships. Apprenticeships are funded through the government and the apprenticeship levy, meaning that there is no cost to the learner. And depending on the size of the employer, that will determine whether they need to either pull down or pay into that levy, which means that they can pull down that funding for almost 100% for all of their training providers. It does go up though, depending on whether the employer is larger or if the candidate is over the age of 19. So there are some things where you might find that it does actually have a bearing, but none of that cost is absorbed by the actual learner itself. So again, depending on the eligibility criteria, so if it is to do with funding, they won't get the funding if they haven't lived in the UK for more than 3 years, for say, or if they haven't got the qualifications that they need to access that particular entry level point for it. Because apprenticeships for everybody, they just understand that there is no cost involved to the actual learner itself.
Perfect, thank you. So what if my child starts an apprenticeship and doesn't want to continue?
Okay, so just like a normal job, there would be a notice period. So if that might be a week, depending on how long that they've worked for the business or for the company, or it could be a longer period of time. But it might affect funding for the future. So for instance, if a learner had completed 6 months of an apprenticeship in, let's say, hospitality and catering, and then they went on to apply for another apprenticeship in the same field or the same qualification, then the next employer might not be able to pull down all of the funding, and they may take this into account when looking to employ that person to start off with. So it can affect funding for the next employer. But the good news is that doesn't apply if the industry changes or if the course changes. A full 100% of the funding is able to be pulled down by the employer at that point.
Where do apprenticeships lead?
Okay, this is a tough question to answer because apprenticeships can lead basically anywhere. There are recognised qualifications, so you can think about any formal setting that you get within that. You can basically apply the ability to where it can go. So if you're thinking about going into like the medical profession, teaching, IT, media, the world is open to them in every way possible. It doesn't change at all in terms of their earning ability or where actually jobs can lead and go to. They are a really, really great way to be able to get that experience, earn some money at the same time, and get recognised qualifications, and then they can keep on building on that as well at the same time.
Can you get UCAS points doing an apprenticeship, and when do apprenticeships start?
Okay, so if you are going in at maybe at a level 3 in terms of an apprenticeship, you can earn UCAS points to go to university if that's where it's going to lead to. So yeah, just the same way as going into A levels, because a level 3 apprenticeship and a foundation degree apprenticeship are great ways to be able to earn those UCAS points. It can then lead to going to university if you needed to have those UCAS points. Apprenticeships, in terms of when they actually start, typically they start between September and January if they are done in cohorts. But there are some employers that consider their apprenticeships to be always on, which basically means that the apprentice, they are advertising when they need one rather than doing it in a particular time of year.
Perfect. And how much money does an apprentice earn?
So an apprentice, national minimum wage for apprenticeship at the moment up until April this year will be £5.28 an hour, and then after that it'll be £6.40. But it's important to remember that this is the minimum amount of money that a young person or a person would earn on an apprenticeship. Also, if a person is over the age national living over, they get paid after the first year, they will also get paid national minimum wage for age. So if an apprenticeship was for 2 years, then the first year might be either £6.40 or £5.28, depending on where it is in the year. But after the first year, they will get paid national minimum wage for age. Now, what I've got next is basically some adverts that have gone out for apprenticeships, and I'm just going to go through and explain a little bit more about each one. So for instance, if you looked at this apprenticeship warehouse position and it's saying that it's going to be £380 per week for an intermediate level 2, that would be, we probably might have an eligibility criteria that the person needs to be over 18, but because they're trying to get people into that industry, that's why the wages has gone up and it's so high. And similarly for an apprentice food and beverage assistant, because they're trying to get people into those kind of sectors, they are finding it a little bit more difficult to get people to apply for those roles. They recognise that paying somebody an apprenticeship wage in those industries is probably not going to cut it and be attractive. So that's why they make the wages a little higher. On the alternative, where you think about something like animal care, now animal care doesn't have a lot of apprenticeships out there in the mainstream. So they know that because there's fewer roles to apply for, then there's going to be it might be a competitive industry to be able to get into from people wanting to do, then they don't have to pay the full amount in what they might do to get into warehousing or food and beverage and things like that. Similarly, if you look at something like an auto care apprenticeship, these kind of mix between the two in terms of how people are applying for them and what kind of level that they are after. But there are then the apprenticeships that require maybe more logistics. So you've got a level 3 apprenticeship for a supply chain apprenticeship on there. So they're looking to pay a bit more money into this one to attract different people to their roles. So hopefully that gives you an idea that that the wages may be determined by the industry in terms of how easy it is to get people into employment within those sectors.
Brilliant. Are there any apprenticeships that are easy to get into when compared to other areas?
Okay, so there are certain fields where it might be a little easier to get into than others. So apprenticeships in such fields as customer service, hospitality, health and social care, they tend to be able to access through either intermediate positions or entry-level positions. So yes, you probably find that they might be more readily available to access for that, and they're probably also more likely to offer a supported apprenticeship. What we've also then found is that the automotive and mechanical apprenticeships, what happens with these is that then it can be organisational or technical ability that will determine whether they are easy to get into or whether they are being advertised. So if you, for instance, wanted to work for a tyre fitting company that was nationally branded, they will probably have a lower eligibility criteria for it, but rather than going maybe working for Mercedes on one of their technical apprenticeships, and the eligibility criteria might be a little bit higher. So it's a bit of a balancing act within the automotive and mechanical industries, and it's very, very industry based. Now, what we found is that also the digital apprenticeship market is one of the fastest growing areas, and with the most advertised role though that's within apprenticeships that we can see is for tech support, and this tends to be readily available as a position. Interestingly, whereas before it used to be associated that apprenticeships were much more likely to be in the construction industry, we have found that these have become the hardest apprenticeships to either access and may become more challenging to get into. Again, from an eligibility criteria, they're quite competitive to be able to get into, and there's a lot of third-party contractors who might not be wanting to take on apprentices, and if they do, they might find that they are offering them to their own personal network of friends and family. So again, it's about networking on those ones.
So the next bit, I'm going to talk about access to work. So really insightful there, David. So just want to give you a little bit of an overview of access to work, what it is and how you can apply for it. So access to work is a grant that is available for young people with SEND to apply for. It can help them with overcoming any barriers in the workplace, but also in terms of helping them to access jobs, but also help them to sustain that job as well. So it's for any young person with either a disability, a health condition or an illness. Really interesting to note that it's a grant, so you don't have to pay it back. And also it can be up to 66,000 per year. Usually they're permitted over a 3-year period and then they'll be reviewed. So what's the aims behind access to work? So if we can just go back, David.
Sorry.
So it's okay. It basically aims to provide practical support and financial assistance. So there's a range of support available, including things like assistive technologies, workplace adaptations, communication support, and anything that that young person will need to obviously sustain their placement. So it can fund things like a job coach. So for example, if you've got a young person that's a little bit nervous when they start in a placement, a third party can be employed called a job coach who supports them on a daily basis. They can help them with things like workplace tasks, they can help them with communication skills, they can help them break down job tasks into smaller tasks so that they can learn the job more easily. So that's a really great resource there. It can also be there to support with transport costs. So we had a young person on one of our programs, but basically he found a placement. It was about an hour and a half from where he worked, which would have meant 3 bus journeys, and we were able to access funding for taxi costs. So I think the award was £28 a day, of which that young person only had to pay £4. So, you know, it is there to flexibly support any transport needs if that young person needs help, if they can't cope with public transport. Other things it can help with is support with mental health and well-being. So any of the talking therapies, it's even funded things like boxing classes if there's been anger management. So it is very wide ranging. It's basically based on what needs the young person has and what will help them overcome those difficulties. So if you can move on to the next slide, please, David. Okay, so they're really straightforward to apply for, and it can be for anybody who has received a job offer, either an apprenticeship, a traineeship or a supported internship offer. Basically, there's an online application portal. So if you go onto the government website and look for access to work, on there is the website and you just go straight into that and you'll be able to access all of the details. The first sections will ask you about eligibility, so you've got to be over 16, and it'll ask you a little bit about where you live, what your address is, where your employer is going to be based, what their address is. It will ask you details about who your supervisor and manager will be. So you complete the application. It probably will take you about 20 minutes to complete. Obviously, it will ask about the kind of support needs that a young person has. So as much detail that you can give there will obviously allow you to get the support that you need, or that your son or daughter will need there. So obviously, once you've completed that, you just send it off and click the submit button. And after submitting the application, you'll then receive notification and potentially be contacted by an access to work advisor. So their role will be just to find out a little bit more background about the young person, to find out a bit more about the needs, and they'll also make recommendations if they need to get quotes for anything. So for example, if a young person wants to access a job coach, then they ask to provide 3 quotes. So once they have all that information, your application will then go through an approval process, and then they'll write out to you to let you know what your grant is. So it's fairly straightforward. You know, simple steps there. They may contact you Access to Work advisor may contact your employer. They will certainly be in touch with you as a parent or a trusted individual. So that's kind of Access to Work in a nutshell.
Okay, thanks very much. That's really great. I think the next thing is just if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask at this stage.
Yeah, that was brilliant. Thank you very much, David and Fiona. We've had loads of questions coming through. I'll start with the first one. This was one we actually had through email. So it's, is it possible to do part-time manual apprenticeship, i.e. sports or construction, with part-time academic qualifications at 16 to 19 for SEN? As an example, college for GCSE and A-level or BTEC?
Unfortunately not is the case for this one. The apprenticeships and the way that they are funded means that you can't be in any form of other employment or in any form of other education at the same time as that you are doing the apprenticeship, or the training provider will lose the funding for that apprenticeship. So yeah, unfortunately, it's the apprenticeship is your course for the determined amount of time that you're going to do it for.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And the next one is another one through email. My son is applying for apprenticeship since for more than a year but hasn't got any yet. Meanwhile, he was doing work placements to gain experience, which has been added to his CV, but he still cannot get any response feedback from the providers. He has got the required qualification for maths and has done level 1 functional skills English and looking forward to start a level 2 course in English. I think if you get an apprenticeship, they do offer you maths and English to do it along with it if you haven't got the qualification. My question is, what is stopping my son from getting an apprenticeship?
Wow, that is a long question, that one. So firstly, I think it's probably worth noting that it is quite a competitive process to get an apprenticeship. So it does require a consistent and determined approach. So, and also what I would recommend that you do is get some support for your son or daughter in actually applying for that apprenticeship. So potentially there's Get My First Job that David works for that he can talk about in a little bit to offer support, but also the National Career Service may be able to help with that too. I think in terms of getting feedback, my first response would be to speak to that provider or that employer to give them a follow-up call. Obviously, they may not be able to give feedback for every application, but I think, you know, if you try a direct approach, that often will give you that information that you need. Is there anything you want to add to that, David?
I think it's probably worth pointing out in terms of how recruitment works within apprenticeships and how training providers actually use third-party recruiters to actually start the initial shortlisting process for an apprenticeship. And when they go through that, what they're looking for is to establish the eligibility criteria, which may have been set by the actual training provider itself. So it's great that your son is working towards getting maths and English, but it may be that you need to contact the training provider if you have an EHCP or something like that, or you could maybe consider them for getting support apprenticeships and getting your young person up that ladder in terms of a priority. I would recommend definitely, like Fiona says, contacting the training providers and the employers to see if there's anything to do and be perseverant with that. The thing about looking at your CV and where you're formatting it, how that comes across as well, is quite important, because a recruiter, if they are using a recruitment company, will look for those parts first before they make their shortlist. So it might not be that they're actually they're not getting put in front of the employer. It's a block at a recruitment stage, and that would be how I maybe look at that. Get My First Job, when we do our apprenticeships, yes, if you are looking for some support to go through, then we do offer basically like coaching service. If you're going through our website or through our jobs, you can go through to one of our recruiters and they will help you through the process.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. We've had quite a lot of questions coming through specifically about access to work, so I'll just answer I'll ask two here. So someone just said, can you just, sorry, you said for a young person, what age does this cover? And then the same person also asked, if you need access to work, at what stage would you inform an employer? Concerns that such needs could affect being accepted to a job or apprenticeship.
Yeah, it is a tricky balance, actually, isn't it? That whole disclosure thing. But potentially access to work is available for 16 plus. My advice would be, in terms of speaking to that employer, you know, ultimately you want to work for an employer that's going to be supportive, and you know, you'll get a feel for that when the young person goes for an interview. And I would suggest or recommend that potentially, depending on what their needs are, you have that almost like decision-making process, whether you think that you disclose that early on, once the job offer has been received. So it's very much on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with that completely. I've been working with a young learner, and he's accessed Network Rail actually, and he's come back to me quite a few times and said, should I disclose this? Do I disclose that I live with autism? Do I disclose that I might have had some mental health issues and things like that? And actually, what we found is that just when speaking to the employer is that they are very, very supportive of wanting to keep people in employment and be able to understand them so that they can better support them. So from that point of view, disclosure can be a great thing in so much as it allows the employer to understand them and then give them the right support in the workplace.
Yeah, brilliant. And just on that question, we've had a question quite similar, which was, how are people with disabilities and SEN actually supported in apprenticeships?
Again, through access to work, they can have an on-the-job coach, if that's the case, that will break things down for them from the actual training providers. It could be that they make allowances into the qualifications in terms of how they're assessed. It could be just about understanding how that they might be able to access different information. Do they need different tools to be able to complete the apprenticeship? Do they need reading aids? And so I think if it is a supported apprenticeship and you are looking down that route, there are lots of different parts of information and help and support that you can access, but it is done on a much more individual need of the learner. And then you've got to rely on the employer themselves to be able to create an inclusive work environment where people understand maybe what sort of challenges or disabilities or neurodiverse needs that they may need meeting for them. So it's about being open with the communication and taking each case or each learner on an individual basis.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. We've got so many questions coming in. I'm struggling to keep up with them. The next one is, if the person has been living abroad but returns to live in England, do they have to wait another 3 years before they can apply?
That's a really difficult question. So it depends on the circumstances and whether and how long they were outside of the UK for that time and the reasons why they're outside of the UK. But normally they are quite strict in so much as that. Yeah, there is. You have to have lived in the UK for more than 3 years before you can access an apprenticeship.
Great, thank you.
So if that answers that, because there is certain criteria where it is exempt to it, but it's a bit. Yeah, it's a bit special, this circumstances, should we say.
Yeah.
Would you say, David, it's worth looking at the National Apprenticeship Service to get that answer?
Yeah, there's if you ever are, there is actually a chat box facility on the bottom of the National Apprenticeship National Apprenticeship Service website. If you have a question about eligibility, they will be able to answer that straight away.
Brilliant, thank you. The next one, well, I think this kind of answers that. What are the best apps or websites to look for apprenticeships? My son would like to do one instead of going to university, and how early would we need to apply?
This is an interesting question, because sometimes what we found as well is that certain candidates, and instead of going to university, may actually take a gap year just so that they can actually apply to go to an apprenticeship. So for instance, Coca-Cola, when they're offering those apprenticeships for their logistics and things like that, people will wait for them to come round. In terms of like best sites to go onto, yeah, the NAS is what is abbreviated, but the National Apprenticeship Service website is great. But you do have lots of other things like going to uni, not going to uni, get my first job. There are, but I would say that most of them are advertised through the National Apprenticeship, but they are not the only ones. Sometimes they don't filter through to the National Apprenticeship site, so that's where you have to be quite careful about what's going through with it. So if you don't see something on the National Apprenticeship Service website, then don't worry. It could be to do with how you put your search criteria in and it hasn't popped back up, and that's what can restrict certain sites from there. So wording is actually, in terms of how you're searching, can be quite important to how you actually find them when you do your search.
I was going to add to that as well, David, this UCAS this year that have all the apprenticeship vacancies on. So they're not just recruiting to level 3, the higher level apprenticeships, they're also having intermediates on there. So UCAS identified that they really want to bring equity amongst qualifications. So that's another really useful source to use too.
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And the next question was, is access to work only available with apprenticeships?
It is available to any employment routes. So from a young person's perspective, it's available for anybody who's doing a supported internship, a traineeship, or a job that can be part-time or full-time. The only exemption from a working route is voluntary work.
Great, thank you. And are there a specific register or training providers who cater more towards SEND?
This is a difficult one. When we looked at the supported apprenticeships, there are 20 apprenticeship and training providers that were nominated to take part in the pilot scheme. HIT Training, in terms of is one of the probably most renowned ones who would deal with hospitality and catering in that kind of industry. But at the moment they're looking to roll it out because the trial has been so successful. They are now looking to roll it out across nationally across all training providers, who will then be able to offer a much broader kind of accessibility to with regard to SEND. But I can't tell you that one training provider is better than another for it at the moment. But the landscape is changing, is what I can tell you.
Yeah, brilliant. A lot of people are asking what age do you have to be? Can you do it at 16 and then leave school, or is this after 16 to 19 at school, especially for SEN young people?
No, you can access apprenticeship. So you have to be over the age of 16. That's one of the eligibility criteria for it. So there is intermediate apprenticeships are aimed at school leavers specifically. So they do tend to cater to be able to get additional GCSEs from that point, so that you can move on to maybe go on to an advanced apprenticeship. And advanced apprenticeships are the level 3s, and they are the A level ones. But no, all you have to be is 16. And say if you can find the right training provider who can then talk to you about a supported apprenticeship, then yes, definitely it's a viable option to be able to leave school and go straight into an apprenticeship.
Yeah, great, thank you. And does apprenticeships means that the EHCPs end? If it didn't work out, would the young person lose their EHCP?
No, the EHCP still continues with an apprenticeship.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm not actually quite sure what this abbreviation means, but someone's asked, can you run an apprenticeship alongside an EOTAS package? I
don't know if I know what that is, I'm sorry.
No, I don't know what that is.
They might follow up just with a bit more info. Next question is, are access to work / supported apprenticeships available to students who have SEND but don't have an EHCP?
Actually, yes, HIT do one. This is one of the things that I would say probably they should be on the call as well now, I have to say that. But yes, they most certainly do from that point of view. I think that sorry, could you repeat the question so I can answer it? I've lost my trail of thought there for a second.
Yeah. Oh God, I think I've lost it now. Oh, so are access to work / supported apprenticeships available to students who have SEND but don't have? Oh no, was that the question?
Yes.
Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, but don't have an EHCP.
Yeah. So yes, is the answer to that. It's a HIT. We're one of the providers that if you said that you were dyslexic and that you needed support with regards to accessing an apprenticeship, then they would have. That was actually part of the trial that they were doing. Is that they would then take that on kind of a bit of a face value. You may have to do something like called a BKSB assessment, or they may make a small assessment to be able to gauge that. But yes, you can access it without having either the HCP. That's the idea of the trial that they did.
Brilliant, thank you. And someone just popped up and said that EOTAS means education out of school. So the question was, can you run an apprenticeship alongside an education out of school package?
I don't know the answer to that. I think it's something we need to check with NAS.
Go and see that. I'm not too sure.
Okie doke. I think that's everything. There's been honestly, I've never seen so many questions come through on a webinar, which is great to see. But I'll just give anyone a couple of minutes just in case. Oh, there was one actually. Sorry, I did miss this one. My son has an EHCP and he's currently doing a level 3 course in health and social care at college, mainly because he didn't know what to do. What pathway do you suggest from there into an apprenticeship or a supported apprenticeship?
It's very specific on a question. So what from health? So he's doing a health and social care currently at the moment.
Yeah.
Is that right? So health and from a point of view, you are looking potentially at things like teaching assistants and stuff like that you can probably go through from that kind of social care. You probably find at the NHS from a social care point of view will also then take it, and they do lots of apprenticeships, and they continue to do more and more, if I'm being honest, at nursing level all the way up to doctorate and master's degrees. So from that point of view, yes, you could probably go through the NHS. I think that I'm not too sure about things like social services at this stage. I'm sure that they will do apprenticeships in that area, in that field, but you've got care practitioners that are working actually in some of the homes and young children's homes that they will be able to access apprenticeships like from that point of view. So if there is that the young person has got that empathetic desire to want to help and support people, then actually you could find that as a viable option for them to transfer into.
Perfect. I was going to also say, obviously, you're accessing level 4 or above apprenticeships with that level of qualification. But just to add to that, dynamic training, similar to HIT, that's a training provider that's specifically offering the health and social care sector, and they offer supported internships, supported apprenticeships. So dynamic training.
Right, brilliant, thank you. We'll get through one last question, if that's all right. Can a job coach come into the workplace with a young person, especially at first, while getting familiar with?
Yes, is the answer to that. So I think the more difficult thing sometimes, and this is the honesty point to it, is that the job coaches aren't always the easiest people to find to do it. Some of the support that they offer tends to then be online, but if you are able to find a job coach and you're able to get the quotes through the government application, then you can ask that they are on site with that young learner and that person from day one, helping to break down maybe the tasks and the work that they need to do and help them adjust to that work-life environment. The challenge might come from finding that person to be able to do it. Now, actually, what I found is that some people, what we've worked with, have known people in the past that are qualified to do that, and have worked with people in the past that do that, and are able to go back to them and say, could you become my work coach? And actually, that is something that is acceptable.